أعزائي المشاهدين، أهلا بكم. يسعدني استضافة الدكتورة غونول تول، مؤسسة ومديرة مركز الدراسات التركية في معهد الشرق الأوسط في واشنطن. الدكتورة تول أستاذة جامعية أيضا في جامعة جورج واشنطن، وسبق لها التدريس في جامعة الدفاع الوطنية. أيضا تستدعى لتقديم شهادات أمام لجان الكونغرس حول قضايا تتعلق بالشؤون التركية وشؤون منطقة الشرق الأوسط. أهلا بك دكتورة تول. يا هلا. دكتورة تول, we are going to talk about U.S.-Turkish relations. For the remaining period of Obama administration, what's your assessment of the relation, the current relation and the relation during this period?
I think there's been a lot of tension, mainly because of Syria. The Turkish government has been quite upset and frustrated with the Obama administration's unwillingness to take a more forceful position, to pursue a more forceful policy against the Assad regime. Clearly, the Syrian conflict has been posing many challenges for Turkey domestically and regionally. So that's the biggest headache of the Turkish government, and Turkey was expecting more from the U.S. administration. And it has been pushing for the Obama administration to establish a no-fly zone within Syria. And yet the U.S. administration has been unwilling to do so. And that's been a problem for Turkey. And I think the two countries have different approaches, they have different priorities on Syria, and they haven't seen really eye to eye. And if you look at it from the US perspective, the Obama administration has been upset with the Turkish government because Turkey has not been fully on board on the anti-Islamic State coalition. The US administration, as we have heard from President Obama just a few days ago after the G7 summit, he complained about Turkey's lack of willingness to do more vis-a-vis fighting against the Islamic State. So I think if you look at it from the US perspective, the priority is to contain the Islamic State. But from Ankara's perspective, the biggest priority is the toppling of the Assad regime. So I think in that regard, there's been a lot of tension. And moving forward, I don't think things will change because the Ankara government thinks that Islamic State is only the symptom. The root cause of the problem is the Assad regime. And if the Obama administration fails to do something more against the regime, then Ankara will not be happy. So I think that we'll keep seeing this tension in the remaining Obama years.
Now, Turkey tried to go around Washington by forging some good relations with other regional, especially because you mentioned the issue of Syria as a very important, high priority. To what extent do you think Turkey was successful in circumventing the Washington? Is that option going to have its implication in Syria? Because that competing approach is Turkish, let's say Turkish, Saudi, Qatari axis is winning, or US winning vis-a-vis the Syrian approach?
I guess the Saudi-Turkey rapprochement and the Qatari support, I think the Syrian opposition supported by these three actors have made some gains in Syria. They have been fighting an effective war against the Assad regime, and we have seen the capture of Idlib, for instance. So that's certainly a success. Turkey has been pursuing this more aggressive Syria policy since 2014. It's mainly because of its frustration with Washington, and also the Saudis and Qataris are also frustrated with Washington. So I think they decided to come together and push for their own solution. And of course that upset the Obama administration, mainly because the groups that are supported by these three actors include groups like Al-Nusra or Ahrar al-Sham, and these are the groups that are considered extremist organizations by the US administration. So if you look at it from the regional perspective, are they winning? we could say that yes, the group that is supported by these countries have made some gains, but we don't know whether they will do enough to topple the Assad regime, because I think that's not really possible if you don't have Iran and Russia on board. Certainly now the Assad regime is almost it's on the defensive. But we know that for the Syrian conflict to end, for the Assad regime to be toppled, you really you have to cut the external support. And Iran, we have seen recently that Iran is now is almost increasing its existence and support for the Assad regime, and I don't think Russia is considering quitting Syria and cutting its support for the regime. So I don't think now we are closer to a picture where Turkey and the Saudis and Qataris would like to see. And if you look at it from the US perspective, the US would like to contain the Islamic State as much as it can. But the question is, so are they winning? Yes. Tel Abyad, the capture of Tel Abyad from the Islamic State by the Kurdish forces is certainly a success because it was supported by the US air support. So that is a success. But the question is... But
this success is not counted on the column of Turkish.
That's a no, this is a success on the part of the US and the anti-Islamic State coalition. But the question is, so is Islamic State losing the war in Syria? I don't think so, because the plan for Turks and the Saudis and the Qataris were they would push al-Nusra and put pressure on al-Nusra to cut its ties with Al-Qaeda, and that's not happening. And I think the Islamic State is becoming stronger in Syria. So I think neither side is winning. I mean, we don't see a Syria where the Assad is close to leaving, and we don't see a Syria where the Islamic State is losing.
Okay, Tel Abyad success for the Kurdish worth discussing alone, but I want to follow up on the issue of the Islamic State, Daesh. This kind of contradictory picture here is, from one hand, United States asking Turkey to help assist, train Syrian moderate, and at the same time asking them to stop directly or indirectly assisting or helping Daesh. How you see this picture? Do you think there is enough evidence that Turkey deceased from assisting directly or indirectly those groups like Daesh and others?
On the contrary, I think until very recently Turkey was providing electricity to the Islamic State controlled Tel Abyad. And that's a big concern. I think after the Islamic State's capture of Mosul was a turning point for Turkey, and Turkey really realized that the Islamic State could, at the end of the day, pose a great challenge for Turkish national security. But on the other hand, Turkey really thinks that the Islamic State is an important tool. It's fighting against the regime, and I think the mindset in Ankara is the Islamic State and groups like that, radical Islamist groups, will not really take root within Syrian society once Assad regime is gone. So that's why it doesn't see the Islamic State as the biggest threat in Syria. So I think it hasn't completely stopped helping and supporting the Islamic State. It is doing more. It's working with the European countries, with the EU, with the US on stepping up border protection. Now it's trying to monitor the European jihadis trying to cross into Syria from Turkish territory. But I don't think, as President Obama just mentioned, I don't think Turkey is doing enough. And we have, I think the clearest indication is what's happening in Tel Abyad. And if you travel to Turkey, and if you are in one of the towns bordering Syria in Turkey, you will see that it's still very easy to cross the border for jihadis. Urfa, for instance, is a Turkish town that has many jihadi groups and groups that are individuals that are linked to the Islamic State, and they go in and out of Syria very easily. So that just shows that Turkey is doing more, compared to 2013, but it's still not there fully. It's still not fully on board on the anti-Islamic State coalition.
Okay, we're going to discuss the issue of Tal Abyad's significance with the Kurdish situation, but also we're going to talk about after the election of Turkey, but after we take a short break. أعزائي المشاهدين، سنتابع لقاءنا مع الدكتورة تول بعد فاصل قصير. ابقوا معنا. أعزائي المشاهدين، أهلا بكم مجددا. نتابع حوارنا مع الدكتورة غونول تول. Doctora, we talked about the issue of Tal Abyad, and you mentioned it as a success in the column of United States. Mm-hmm. Many people see it as also a drastic development for the Kurdish situation, because we have a Turkish policy toward the Kurdish Syrian different than the Turkish policy toward the Kurdish in Iraq, also the Kurds inside Turkey itself. How you see this going to affect Turkish policy, and what is the prospect for what they are talking about, a Kurdish enclave or Kurdish state being formed, connected in Syria itself and also with the rest of the region?
I think this is a nightmare for Turkey, and Turkey is quite anxious. And I think it has reason to be anxious, because the capture of Tal Abyad, I think, is a milestone for the Kurds for several reasons. I think the first one is now the Kurds could connect the cantons, the Al Jazeera and Kobani and Al Afrin. So if they can connect those autonomous Kurdish regions, they could have a Kurdish belt stretching from northern Iraq to the Turkish town of Hatay almost. And the scenario that is being debated in Ankara very anxiously is that Kurds will finally, so this is just the first step, but if they can capture and if they can connect those cantons, the Kurds could have access to Mediterranean. And that is bad news for Turkey, because until now Turkey has signed all these energy deals with the Kurdistan regional government and almost laid out the economic foundations of an independent Kurdistan. And Turkey did not mind that as long as the Kurdistan regional government was dependent on Turkey. It's a landlocked entity. It doesn't have access to the sea. So if it wants to sell its oil, it really needed the cooperation of Turkey. So that was a perfect picture, because now you have a Kurdish entity that is dependent on Turkey. But if the Kurds can manage to have access to the Mediterranean, then they would not need Turkey. And that scares the Turkish government and the Turkish military establishment. So that is a big achievement for the Kurds. But I think it also has another dimension. I think the capture of Tal Abyad is just another success for the Kurds in terms of they have become the ground force of the US in Washington's fight against the Islamic State. They have fought a very effective war in Kobani. They are doing a wonderful job in Iraq. Peshmerga, initially they were weak militarily, they could not really wage an effective war, but we have seen recently that they're doing a better job. And we know that the US reportedly, the US is working with groups linked to the PKK in Iraq. So all these developments point to something that is very nerve-wracking for Ankara, and that is the Kurds, and not just the Iraqi Kurds, but the groups that are linked to the PKK, are working with the US administration. And I think this cooperation will even get more intense in the coming days for several reasons. First, look at it from Obama's perspective. He's facing a Syria where the Islamic State and groups like al-Nusra, al-Qaeda linked groups are getting even more powerful. And they are fighting against the moderate Syrian opposition. We have seen that in Idlib, in Aleppo. So the US is running out of groups that are on the ground, that are willing to work with the US in its fight against the Islamic State. So the Kurds now, they seem to be the perfect partner, the perfect ground forces that are both secular and that are willing to work against the Islamic State, and that are really that the US could depend on. So on the one hand, Turkey is very anxious because there is a domestic Kurdish reality now. The Kurdish party captured a historic 13%. So domestically, the Kurds are stronger than ever. And regionally, the Kurds are stronger than ever. And on top of that, Turkey's partners, allies, strategic allies like the US, is now working with the groups that Turkey considers as enemies. So this is a nightmare scenario.
What kind of action, is it military action, that Turkey alone can do to prevent such a nightmare scenario to continue?
Well, let me answer your first question. So is there a military strategy that Turkey could employ to change this worrying picture? I think realistically, no. Because Turkey, it's very risky for Turkey to militarily intervene in Syria unilaterally. Turkish public opinion is against that, and the government's, the AKP Syria policy has been very unpopular. So the Turkish public thinks that Turkey has been way too involved in Syria. So that's why now we have seen that sentiment growing in Turkey, that Turkey should go back to its traditional Western-oriented foreign policy. So that's why we have seen an increase in public support for Turkey's EU membership. So Turkish public is against that. And I think it would be politically very risky and militarily very risky for Turkey to do something unilaterally in Turkey. And we have seen that. I'm not sure whether Turkey is capable of doing that either, because remember when Turkey was evacuating the Süleyman Shah tomb a few months ago, it was a relatively, I believe, militarily simple operation. So the Turkish military went in and out of Syria to evacuate the tomb, but Turkey had to depend on the YPG forces. So the YPG almost opened a corridor for the Turkish military to go inside the Syria and evacuate the tomb and go back. So even for a limited operation like that, if the Turkish military needs the support of local actors like the PYG, how can Turkey undertake a more sophisticated, complicated military operation unilaterally? I think that's not realistic. But there are debates, and there's a very recent debate in Ankara after the capture of Tel Abyad by the Kurdish forces. So there are several scenarios. I think the Turkish government is now considering creating protected pockets within Syria. And the aim is to prevent the formation of a unified Kurdish belt. So Turkey does not want the Kurds to connect all those 3 Kurdish cantons in northern Syria.
So are we for Turkey to support Al-Qaeda and support Daesh directly, or enforcing them to create those pockets who are separating
I don't know.
Kurdish?
I don't think we don't know the details, and we don't know where exactly they're planning to establish those protected zones. So I'm not sure what the real strategy is, but the idea is to prevent the Kurds from connecting those cantons. It could be either through a direct or indirect support to the Islamic State, or it could be probably Turkey will keep pushing the US and other regional actors and other international and regional actors to establish a no-fly zone. I think that's Turkey's strategy. I don't think Turkey is considering directly intervening unilaterally. But so that's what is being debated in Ankara right now.
Well, we have to address the issue of the election because we don't have that much time left for us. The prospect for future government, coalition government, what do you think? We touch upon the impact regionally for potential impact for Turkish policy in the future. But can you assess what's the picture going to be internally after this election in the ascendance of the Kurdish also force inside Turkey, and at the same time what kind of policy regionally Turkey would go beyond only Syria?
I think now there are coalition negotiations. If you look at it, I think the ultra-nationalist MHP is the most likely candidate for a coalition partner. They are the AKP and the ultra-nationalist MHP. They're ideologically very close. But there are also other options. The AKP could form a coalition with the CHP. The pro-Kurdish party, it ruled out a coalition, forming a coalition with the AKP. So we're now talking about two coalition partners. And either MHP-AKP coalition or an AKP-CHP coalition. But both of these options are problematic because all opposition parties, including MHP, CHP, and HDP, they will try to extract some concessions from the AKP to form a coalition government. MHP is very concerned about Erdogan's heavy hand over the government. So probably as a precondition, the MHP will ask Erdogan or the AKP to for Erdogan to remain within his constitutional limits, meaning no meddling in government affairs. But another precondition that is more problematic for the AKP and especially for Erdogan is MHP will ask the AKP to reopen the corruption investigations, and that's a red line for Erdogan because his son is involved in the corruption investigations. And again, with the CHP has preconditions. The CHP will also ask Erdogan to refrain from meddling in government's affairs and decision making, and also the corruption case. So these are conditions that are not really acceptable for Erdogan. And so I think what we will see soon is the president, constitutionally, the government has 45 days to form a coalition government, and if that doesn't happen, the president can call for early elections.
Do you think election is
early elections is possible? It's
possible.
And I think the end game for Erdogan is he will push for early elections because he thinks that the AKP will capture more votes, capture around 43, even 44% this time, if there is an early election. And I think he has reason to believe so because he thinks some AKP supporters did not go to the polls because they were frustrated with the AKP, but this time they will go to the polls and vote.
Do you see any crisis internally in the Erdogan party because of the election?
Yes.
Exploding?
I think we have seen that tension even between Ahmet Davutoğlu, Prime Minister Davutoğlu, and President Erdogan, but also within the senior AKP leadership, there has been some resentment because Erdogan specifically focused on his presidential dream. That was the backbone of AKP's campaign, and that was a problem. So some within the party interpret the failure of the AKP as the direct result of Erdogan's meddling and his heavy hand and his divisive rhetoric.
Dr. Tol, unfortunately we don't have any more time to discuss. I have many questions, but maybe we'll have another opportunity in the future.
Sure.
Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
أعزائي المشاهدين، شكرا لحسن استماعكم، وسيكون لنا لقاءات مع شخصيات أخرى من الولايات المتحدة في المستقبل. إلى اللقاء.